January 31st, 2005. Santa Barbara County Superior Court, Santa Maria, California, 8:47 a.m. Michael Jackson walked into the courthouse wearing pajama bottoms, a black jacket and slippers. He'd just been rushed from the hospital, suffering from severe back pain, and looked nothing like the king of pop who dominated the music industry for 2 decades. He looked like a broken man about to face the fight of his life. Inside courtroom 4, 200 journalists from around the world waited. Cameras lined the street outside. Helicopters circled overhead. This was the trial everyone thought would never happen. The trial that would finally answer the question that had haunted Michael Jackson since 1993. Was he guilty? The case was the people of the state of California v. Michael Joseph Jackson. The charges: conspiracy, child abduction, false imprisonment, and extortion. But those weren't the serious charges. The serious charges were counts 2 through 5, 4 counts of lewd acts upon a child under 14 years old, and counts 6 through 10, 4 counts of administering an intoxicating agent to a child to assist in commission of a felony. If convicted on all counts, Michael Jackson faced up to 20 years in prison. The alleged victim was a 13-year-old boy named Gavin Arvizo. According to the prosecution, Jackson had befriended Gavin, a cancer survivor, invited him to Neverland Ranch, and committed acts that prosecutors would describe in graphic detail during the trial. Jackson's defense team insisted it was all a lie, that Gavin's mother, Janet Arvizo, was a con artist who'd targeted Jackson for money, that the entire family had a history of making false accusations, that this was an extortion scheme from the beginning. For 4 months, the trial would expose the darkest corners of Michael Jackson's life. Witnesses would testify about Jackson's behavior with young boys. Former employees would describe disturbing incidents at Neverland. Prosecutors would present evidence that Jackson had a pattern, a method of befriending vulnerable families, isolating young boys, and grooming them. But the jury would find Michael Jackson not guilty on all counts. Every single charge dismissed. Complete acquittal. Was justice served, or did a guilty man go free because his accusers weren't credible enough? This is the story of the people v. Michael Jackson, the 2005 trial that was supposed to answer all questions but left everyone more confused than ever. The trial where the prosecution had evidence but couldn't prove intent, where the defense admitted disturbing behavior but argued it wasn't criminal, based entirely on court transcripts, testimony, evidence presented at trial, and post-verdict statements from jurors. This is what happened inside the courtroom that decided Michael Jackson's fate. Part 1. The Accusers, 2000-2003. How Michael Jackson met Gavin Arvizo. According to testimony presented at trial, Gavin Arvizo first encountered Michael Jackson in 2000, when Gavin was 10 years old and suffering from cancer. A family friend arranged for Gavin, who was a fan of Jackson's music, to meet Jackson at a Laugh Factory comedy club in Los Angeles. Court testimony indicated that Jackson was immediately drawn to Gavin. According to witnesses, Jackson gave Gavin his phone number and invited him to visit Neverland Ranch. Over the following months, according to trial testimony, Jackson developed a close relationship with Gavin and his family. Jackson paid for medical treatments when the family struggled financially. He invited the entire Arvizo family to stay at Neverland for extended periods. He bought gifts for Gavin and his siblings. Defense attorneys characterized this as innocent charity, Jackson helping a sick child and his struggling family. Prosecutors characterized it as a grooming pattern, Jackson isolating a vulnerable family to gain access to the child. The relationship intensified in 2003. According to trial testimony, Gavin was now 13 and in remission from cancer. The Arvizo family was essentially living at Neverland, sometimes for weeks at a time. In February 2003, a British documentary called Living with Michael Jackson aired on television. The documentary, filmed by journalist Martin Bashir, included footage of Jackson holding hands with Gavin and admitting that he shared his bedroom with young boys, though Jackson insisted nothing inappropriate occurred. The documentary created an international scandal. Child welfare authorities in Los Angeles began investigating. Prosecutors in Santa Barbara reopened their inquiry into Jackson's behavior. According to the prosecution's theory presented at trial, Jackson panicked after the documentary aired. Fearing investigation, Jackson and his associates allegedly held the Arvizo family against their will at Neverland, pressured them to participate in a rebuttal video defending Jackson, and attempted to move them out of California to prevent them from speaking to authorities. During this period between February and March 2003, prosecutors alleged that Jackson committed the acts that became the criminal charges, giving Gavin alcohol, which prosecutors characterized as intoxicating agents to assist in commission of a felony, and engaging in inappropriate conduct. In July 2003, Gavin and his family gave statements to police. In November 2003, Jackson was arrested and charged with multiple felonies, and in January 2005 the trial began. Part 2. The prosecution's case. February-March 2005. The state tries to prove a pattern. Lead prosecutor Tom Sneddon, the Santa Barbara district attorney, who'd been investigating Jackson since 1993, built his case around three arguments. First, Jackson had a pattern of befriending young boys and engaging in inappropriate conduct. The prosecution called 5 witnesses who testified under granted immunity about their experiences with Jackson years earlier. Jason Francia testified that as a child in the 1990s, Jackson had tickled him inappropriately on several occasions. Francia's mother had been a maid at Neverland and had brought Jason to work with her. Wade Robson, Brett Barnes, and Macaulay Culkin were called as prosecution witnesses, but all 3 denied any inappropriate conduct had occurred. This backfired on the prosecution. 3 of their own witnesses defended Jackson. 2 other individuals gave testimony under pseudonyms in court records, claiming Jackson had engaged in inappropriate conduct with them in the 1990s. However, defense attorneys noted these witnesses had previously denied anything happened and had changed their stories only after being granted immunity from perjury prosecution. Second, Jackson gave children alcohol and showed them adult material as part of a grooming process. Multiple witnesses testified about seeing Jackson provide alcohol to young boys at Neverland. Former employees testified they'd witnessed Jackson drinking wine from soda cans with young boys present. Flight attendants from Jackson's private plane testified about Jackson drinking with children during flights. The prosecution also presented evidence that Jackson possessed adult magazines and materials, which prosecutors argued were used to desensitize children to sexual content. Third, the Arvizo family's testimony was credible despite their problems. This was the prosecution's weakest point. Under cross-examination, the Arvizo family's credibility fell apart. Gavin's mother, Janet Arvizo, testified for multiple days. Defense attorneys presented evidence that she had previously sued JCPenney, claiming security guards had beaten her family. The case settled, but witnesses testified the incident had been exaggerated, lied about her family's financial situation to obtain welfare benefits while Jackson was giving them money, coached her children on what to say in previous legal matters, made inconsistent statements about when the alleged incidents occurred. Gavin himself testified for several days, but under cross-examination, his timeline didn't make sense. He claimed the inappropriate conduct occurred after the documentary aired, which meant after Jackson was already under investigation and would have been taking extreme caution. Defense attorneys argued this was logically absurd. Why would Jackson, knowing he was under investigation, suddenly engage in criminal conduct with a boy who was now frequently accompanied by his family? Part 3. The defense case. April-May 2005. Jackson's team fights back. Defense attorney Thomas Mesereau Jr. presented a simple but effective strategy: attack the credibility of the accusers while admitting Jackson's behavior was unusual but not criminal. The defense's argument: yes, Michael Jackson is strange. Yes, he has inappropriate relationships with children. He invites them to his home. He gives them gifts. He shares his bedroom space. But strange is not criminal. Poor judgment is not criminal. What the prosecution must prove is that Michael Jackson committed specific criminal acts, and they cannot prove that because it didn't happen. Mesereau called numerous witnesses who testified that the Arvizo family had a history of making false claims for financial gain. Janet Arvizo had specifically targeted celebrities, telling people she wanted her children to meet famous people who might give them money. The family had praised Jackson and expressed gratitude right up until they suddenly claimed abuse. The timeline of the alleged abuse didn't match with when the family was actually at Neverland. The defense also called character witnesses who testified about Jackson's gentle nature and his genuine love for helping sick children. Critically, Mesereau addressed Jackson's most damaging admission, that he shared his bedroom with young boys. In Jackson's own interview with Martin Bashir, played for the jury, Jackson had said, "Why can't you share your bed? The most loving thing to do is to share your bed with someone." The prosecution argued this was an admission of inappropriate conduct. The defense argued Jackson was culturally naive and emotionally stunted. He genuinely saw nothing wrong with sleeping in the same room as children because he had the mindset of a child himself. Michael Jackson is a 46-year-old man with the emotional development of a 10-year-old, Mesereau told the jury. He lives in a fantasy world where he truly believes he's Peter Pan, but living in a fantasy world doesn't make you a criminal. Part 4. The verdict. June 13, 2005. The jury decides. After 4 months of testimony and 14 days of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. Michael Jackson was found not guilty on count 1, conspiracy, not guilty on counts 2 to 5, lewd acts upon a child, not guilty on counts 6 through 10, administering intoxicating agent, not guilty on all counts, complete acquittal. Michael Jackson walked out of the courthouse a free man. He raised both hands in victory, waved to fans, and was driven back to Neverland. Prosecutors were devastated. District Attorney Tom Sneddon, who'd pursued Jackson for over a decade, gave a brief press conference. "We accept the jury's verdict. The people of California put forth their best case, and the jury spoke." But almost immediately, questions emerged. Had justice been served, or had Michael Jackson gotten away with crimes because his accusers weren't perfect victims? Part 5. The jurors speak. Post-verdict interviews. Why they voted to acquit. In the days and weeks following the verdict, several jurors gave interviews explaining their decision. Their statements revealed a prosecution case that fell apart under scrutiny. Juror 5, Raymond Holtman, told the Associated Press, "The mother, Janet Arvizo, just was not believable. She was all over the place. If I couldn't believe the mother, how could I believe the son?" Juror 5-1, Paulina Cocos, told CNN, "We felt there was not enough evidence to convict. The timeline didn't make sense. Why would Michael Jackson do these things when he knew he was being investigated?" Juror 3 told Fox News, "Some of us thought Michael probably did something inappropriate at some point in his life, but that wasn't what we were deciding. We were deciding if he committed these specific crimes with this specific boy, and we didn't think the prosecution proved it." This last statement was particularly significant. Some jurors believe Jackson was likely guilty of something, just not guilty of the specific charges in this case. Juror 8, Eleanor Cook, later gave controversial interviews where she expressed regret about the verdict. She told tabloid media, "I think we made a mistake. I think Michael Jackson did molest boys, but the prosecution didn't give us enough evidence to convict on these particular charges." When asked why she voted not guilty if she believed he was guilty, Cook responded, "Because that's how the system works. You can't convict on suspicion. You need proof. And the prosecution didn't prove these specific charges beyond a reasonable doubt." The jury's logic came down to this. Roddy Arvizo family's credibility was destroyed during trial. The timeline of alleged abuse didn't make logical sense. The prosecution's pattern evidence was either denied by witnesses or came from people with credibility problems. The defense presented a plausible alternative explanation: extortion attempt by a family with a history of false claims. But several jurors admitted, just because we found him not guilty doesn't mean we think he's innocent. Part 6. What the evidence showed. The disturbing reality the trial exposed. Even though Jackson was acquitted, the trial revealed behavior that many found deeply troubling. Admissions from Jackson himself. Jackson admitted sharing his bedroom with young boys on numerous occasions. Jackson admitted giving children alcohol, though he claimed it was only a small amount and presented as Jesus juice as a joke. Jackson admitted to having young boys stay at Neverland without parental supervision for extended periods. Testimony from former employees. Multiple Neverland employees testified they had witnessed Jackson in bed with young boys. Security guards testified about Jackson's alarm system that alerted him if anyone approached his bedroom. Staff members testified about being instructed to deny that children were staying overnight. Evidence found at Neverland. During the 2003 search, investigators found adult material and art books containing nude images. While not illegal to possess, prosecutors argued these materials were used as grooming tools. Defense argued Jackson was an art collector, and these were legitimate art books. The character witnesses. Ron and many witnesses testified that Jackson was wonderful with children and never inappropriate, but other witnesses testified they had seen behavior that made them uncomfortable, even if not explicitly criminal. What emerged was a portrait of a man whose relationship with children was, at minimum, extremely inappropriate, even if the prosecution couldn't prove it crossed into criminality in this specific case. Part 7. The aftermath. What happened to everyone involved? Michael Jackson. The trial destroyed him. Despite being acquitted, Jackson never recovered professionally or personally. He left Neverland Ranch immediately after the trial and never returned. He moved to Bahrain, then Ireland, then Las Vegas, effectively exiling himself from the United States. His finances collapsed. Legal fees from the trial exceeded $30 million. His reputation was destroyed. Radio stations stopped playing his music. Endorsement deals vanished. He became increasingly isolated, increasingly dependent on prescription medications, increasingly erratic in behavior. 4 years after his acquittal, on June 25, 2009, Michael Jackson died of acute propofol intoxication administered by his personal physician, Dr. Conrad Murray. The Arvizo family. Gavin Arvizo has never publicly discussed the case since the trial. The family received no financial settlement from Jackson. Unlike the 1993 case, they disappeared from public view. Defense attorneys and some media outlets continued to characterize them as con artists who'd made false allegations, but they were never charged with perjury or filing a false report. The jurors. Several jurors later expressed conflicted feelings about their verdict. While legally correct, some felt morally troubled. Juror Eleanor Cook told a British tabloid in 2009, "I feel terrible about it. I feel like we let Michael Jackson get away with something." But other jurors defended the verdict, noting that the prosecution's case had too many problems. The prosecution. District Attorney Tom Sneddon retired in 2006, his decade-long pursuit of Jackson ending in failure. He died in 2014, never achieving the conviction he'd sought since 19. Epilogue. Did the system work? The impossible question. The Michael Jackson trial illustrates a fundamental tension in the American criminal justice system, the need to protect the innocent versus the need to convict the guilty. To convict someone of a crime, especially a serious crime like child abuse, prosecutors must prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. This is a very high standard, deliberately designed to prevent innocent people from going to prison. In Jackson's case, the prosecution couldn't meet that standard. The accusers had credibility problems, the timeline didn't make sense, the evidence was circumstantial, and so the jury acquitted. But many legal experts noted troubling realities. Child abuse cases are notoriously difficult to prove, they typically occur in private, evidence is limited, victims are children who make imperfect witnesses, and wealthy defendants can hire the best lawyers. The Arvizo family's credibility problems didn't mean nothing happened, it just meant the prosecution couldn't prove what happened to the required legal standard. Several child protection advocates argued that the trial showed the system failing victims, that Jackson was acquitted not because he was innocent, but because the burden of proof in criminal cases is so high that child abuse is nearly impossible to prove when the defendant has unlimited resources for defense. Others argued that's exactly how the system should work, that we'd rather let guilty people go free than convict innocent people, and that Jackson's acquittal proved the system worked correctly. The truth is probably somewhere in between. Michael Jackson engaged in behavior with children that was, at minimum, wildly inappropriate. His pattern of befriending young boys, having them stay overnight, sharing his bedroom, giving them gifts and alcohol, this behavior was deeply troubling even if it never crossed into criminal conduct. But the prosecution couldn't prove that any specific criminal act occurred with Gavin Arvizo. The evidence wasn't strong enough, the witnesses weren't credible enough, and under American law that means acquittal was the correct verdict. Did Michael Jackson molest children? We'll never know with certainty. The 1993 case settled before trial, the 2005 case ended in acquittal, Jackson died before any other cases could proceed. What we do know is this: Michael Jackson's relationships with children were inappropriate, his judgment was severely impaired, his behavior created situations where abuse could occur, and whether criminal acts happened or not, children were put at risk by adults who should have protected them. The 2005 trial didn't answer the question, was Michael Jackson guilty? It only answered, could the prosecution prove he was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt? And the answer to that second question was no. Sometimes in the American justice system that's the best we can do, even when it doesn't feel like enough.